my Twitter for the 12 people paying attention.
I had someone today who I noticed. Are we live right now?
Yeah, we're
okay. Never mind then. I'll tell you later. What am I doing here? Oh yeah, I'm looking for going live. Yeah, so I ordered dinner today, and I ordered from like my favorite Italian place, and I like to get their like garlic bread with cheese on top, and it was all burnt. I was so disappointed. No. Like rock hard. No, like the actual.
Oh, the meal. That's even worse.
But no, I'm pretty excited. What I was thinking we could do is just because we're gonna have like a lot of. I think there's gonna be some people here. No, my hair's a mess right now. That's why I'm wearing the hat. There's going to be, I think, at least a few. It does. What's going on, man? I think there's going to be a few new people. So I think actually even just going over like what most people generally agree on in terms of like what the two major variables that affect horses are, base ability, like how it works into the racing system, and then we could go into distance preference kind of like in detail. And some of the things that, BG has discovered and we've kind of talked about since the last kind of major stream that we've had.
Sweet.
Yep.
Plus, we'll tease BG's big visualizer project.
Oh yeah, let me get that ready for when it's time.
What's up, Gags?
Hey, Gags.
I actually think that
Dragnet. I thought about buying like an LED light and like some of the streamers do with the changing with the music and different colors, but I couldn't get it to work with my old Wi-Fi setup. So
yeah, Drag, you can be our hype man. We'll take it. Yeah, everybody's gonna be disappointed that BG doesn't have his horse with him this time.
Yeah.
I know. I'm not at the office where the green screen is, so no, can't do it.
Yeah. Or the barn, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, no, not in the barn.
All right, we'll give everybody another minute or two to trickle in.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna buy another horse today. Actually, I had some deals work out, and I don't know if you guys saw, but I've been running some monsters lately.
I saw Real Crystal,
Raydell, Mundo. Wait, yeah, no, yeah, is that his name? I don't know. Anyway, Black Angus and Honey Money.
Honey Money. Those are some throwbacks, man. I haven't heard those names for a minute.
They're pretty fun to run. It fills the hole where Discord used to be. So
yeah. Darthside had a nice question for you, CJ.
Darth Talon. Is Darth Talon good?
Yeah.
And are you selling to me for pennies? Because that is what I have.
Yeah. Dragnet, not financial advice, but I think we need to see a bottom before anybody whales back in or apes back into ETH.
I don't know, man. We just saw what Poodle go for like 10 ETH or whatever.
I'm not talking about horses. I'm just saying
okay.
Liquidity wise, buying ETH. We're at a pretty critical area where we could see 2,300 pretty quickly. So
yeah, we've been below 2,000 pretty recently, so yeah. I'm not concerned. What's the worst that could happen?
CJ, next auction.
2.5? I got you. All right. Well, do you guys want to like get started or?
Yeah, let's do it. So, just for everybody joining us, I think we were going to start with talking a little bit about the racing environment, just to kind of set the mood. Talk about how many races we're seeing. I tweeted something out earlier. We actually had a little bit of surprising action on the paid races this week that we want to show you. And then then I think, we're going to touch on some of the topics that we've advertised, talk about distance preference, talk about how we think racing works, some of the things that we've seen with Flames and over the last month or so that have kind of, we think, helped us figure out a little bit better how racing works. And so we want to share that with you guys. Hey, Snooze, what's going on? So, I think and then we'll have a few things one thing that BG is working on that we might sneak peek. We'll see how timing's going and, talk through some examples. And then toward the end of the stream, we'll jump into some horse analysis a little bit, take some questions, because I think you guys might have a little bit of questions here with some of the stuff that we're going to cover. So I think with that, I guess, BG, let me pull up your charts that you put together.
I was just looking behind me because I realized my Wi-Fi board is up there with my password and network name, but it's okay. It's obscured by the globe.
So, first chart is overall races. I'm not sharing my screen, so we're going to need to go ahead and do that. So this is just a line chart showing every race that's been run that we're able to pull, or BG was able to pull out of the API. And so you see a little tiny bar there that's a partial day, but this is, I believe, everything through yesterday, right, BG?
Yeah, this was up to last night.
This afternoon, yeah. And then we've got the next one is paid races. So similar pattern.
Yeah.
And you see, we talked a little bit about it last stream, I believe. You saw 1,500 races, kind of 1,100 to 1,500 races in June and July. And then when they reduced the 30-second, the time between races to 30 seconds, we jumped up to 3,000. And then you had a little bit of a downtrend after racing broke and they implemented fatigue. You saw a little bit of a downtrend, and then this week we're actually flattening out and actually a little bit up, which I think to a few of us was a little bit surprising. But I think this
makes me feel good
that,
though.
Exactly. I mean, people are, even though it's a little bit difficult to race right now, people are still racing, and that's a good thing. So the interesting one is free races, as you guys have probably heard or seen. We saw kind of 160 to 200 free races a day throughout June, July, and August. And then after they announced the $20,000 of free races, again, we talked a little bit about this last stream, but we jumped up to 800 races a day, free races. And we've actually seen that tail off a little bit. I don't have a great explanation for that. I'd like to think, based on the paid racing trends, that some of those horses that were running free races have entered into a few more paid races, and that's why you've seen a little bit of a step back. I haven't been paying attention to race generation though, but so that might be a race generation thing. I don't know, CJ or BG, if you guys have any.
My guess is it's bugs in the race generation.
Race is not confirming or not loading into the so
or people not being able to join, so that it doesn't trigger one to fill.
Right. And then the last thing I wanted to show, which was the line charts that I showed last stream. I've updated those through for the last 10 days. And as you see, I mean, this combines kind of the three bar charts that we just showed you guys. Little bit of an uptrend over the last week or so on paid races. And then overall, again, a little bit surprisingly, we've been relatively flat at around 2,000 races a day for paid races. over the last 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. So relatively positive compared to the environment I think some of us feel like we're facing. And I think we're hopeful that, or really, whatever word we want to use that's stronger than hopeful, that stamina rolls out, as soon as possible. And we should see an uptick in racing, and hopefully some of the people who have kind of stepped to the sidelines come back into racing, because I think you still have a good number of people that are sitting on the sidelines and kind of waiting to see some of the changes that have been promised. Yes, news for free racing. I've tried to join a few with some of my donkeys and been utterly unsuccessful. So
listen, I spend most of the day with my computer screen up while I'm working, and I can see a free race as soon as it pops up. I've tried to get into like probably 15 to 20 of them with like bad horses over the last like few days. Cannot get into a single one ever.
Yeah.
And people just tell me to click right away, but I mean, like, I'm pretty, like, I have good internet. I can click pretty fast. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that it's a numbers game, because there's hundreds of people clicking right away right now. So there's that issue. And then I think people are still botting too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because they did the Cloudflare stuff. They added, it filters out some people, but like there's anything where there's money, people are going to find workarounds. Like I had to go find workarounds just so I could get the historical data still for all of my stuff. So I know there are some.
I had to quit using the API pull for my fatigue because I was getting rate limited every time.
Yeah, yeah, it's so annoying. Like they want to help people out and stop the botters, but you really have to think about the approach to do that, because in the naive approach where you just rate limit people, the botters find a workaround, and then the humans find it even harder to get into a race. So it actually helps the botters.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we talked about that a little bit, just like taking away the incentive to bot is way more effective in terms of stopping bots than just implementing like, captchas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's to me, it would be simple to just like make a queue for free races, or just like limit the amount of free races you're allowed to run a day. And those would be way bigger deterrents to botting, in my opinion.
Yeah, it definitely pushes the incentives around. Like, if you limit, then people are like, botters are just going to get a bunch of horses, so they can have the same number of races ran. Which
I mean, at least at that point, you're stimulating the market a little bit, right?
Yeah. So it has to be a kind of, you got to put some thought into it, right? Like it's a combination of incentives, and like Top Shot had a huge bot problem, and they fiddled around with captchas and all sorts of stuff, but a huge part of it was just being able to detect accurately bot activity and then ban those people. And so they have a terms of service that allows them to just take everything you've made, essentially. So I think ZED has a more hands-off, decentralized approach that they've really stuck to, especially like when people get hacked. The answer is like, sorry, we can't do anything for you. So I don't think they're gonna come down on botters. Yeah, right.
Yeah, can't do anything for you.
Right.
So I think that's kind of what we wanted to cover. Just start off with, spend a few minutes on the racing environment and some of the numbers that we've seen. And we wanted to jump now into covering distance preference and the quote unquote racing engine and some observations that we have. So guys, I don't know if you have a preference. I was going to pull up a horse and just show kind of flames and what, different kind of flame patterns and how just a couple different examples.
Yeah.
And kind of how those horses looked. And then we can start talking about the roles and, how we think the math works. CJ, I know you said you wanted to spend some time talking about the, combination of variables or the combination of attributes, which I think.
Yeah, maybe just like a simple overview of like what we know about horses and how the race environment works, or what is generally agreed upon, just for like anyone that might be new and isn't really familiar with like variance and distance preference and baseability and all that stuff.
So do you want to go ahead and
yeah, for sure. And I think something that'll be good too is if we pulled up a few examples of like the different profiles in terms of like showing what a spiker is, showing what, you know, a flat horse is, that sort of thing. But yeah, number of times fed is very important as well. There's a high correlation. But so basically what the kind of like major things that are derived from the horse, at least, that make up the racing environment would be like variance, which is, you know, the difference in performance, or like I don't know, I can't find the word right now, but like the variance would be like your performance going to both ends of the spectrum in terms of like winning and losing, or like being able to run fast versus slow. And like the higher variance you have, the faster and slower you run. Distance preference is just, we believe it's kind of like an additive variable that piles onto base ability that makes you stronger. Whether it's if you're a sprinter, it makes you stronger from 1,000 or going away from 1,600 towards 1,000. And other distance preference would be long distance, which is like it makes you stronger going away from 1,600 over the 2,600. I think it gets a little bit weird at 2,400 and 2,600, where like actually, BG, you know, maybe really good is to just show the chart that you have, or the graph that you have, that shows how distance, like the average odds moving away from 1,600 for the population. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah. I'll have to find it.
You know, I think I have it, and
Okay.
Maybe I can send it to David, because I know we have it. But I think that's a good visualization for people that are like, because you get the question a lot where it's like, how do you know that 1,600 has no distance preference, and like, what does it look like?
Right.
So I'll just go and find that. But you guys can start going into the profiles and stuff while I look.
Yeah. So if you find that chart, I was just gonna kind of talk visually about some of the ways you can kind of see variance and distance preference in some of these horses. So one way, you know, you won't often see these speed charts up, but one way, if you have a good sample size of races at a certain distance, call it 50 plus, you will see variance show up with flatter speed curves, where there are more. So you have kind of your normal, this is Moolah, for example. You have kind of your normal distribution is green, or your average across the racing population. And then you have areas that are above both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. That flatter curve is really what variance looks like. And that was CJ's point about sort of that performance curve stretching, or you know, not being the same normal distribution as you might expect to see. And then distance preference, we've talked about flames, and
Grip Talk hates it when we call it flames.
When you have well, I don't like heat or fire, so I'm going with flames. When you have odds, it's easy to see too, but especially when you have flames, you see, you know, the distance preference pretty well represented by wherever those flames show up for different distances. So for Moolah, it's long distance, and for horse that some of you may have seen some news about recently, for Poodle, it's short distance. So you see 100% at 1,000, 98% at 1,200, and 70% at 1,400. And so, as you can see, you know, neither of those profiles have flames at 1,600, which is kind of the inverse of what we were talking about. CJ, did you send me that chart? Yeah,
I did. Yeah, I sent it to you on Discord.
So do you guys want to explain this one, because I'm not sure I've seen this one before.
Yeah. So this is I took average odds by distance for every horse that has at least one. I think this chart is actually every horse that has 3 races in each length, and you can see the pattern. you have this 1600 is this kind of baseline measure, and then the further you get from 1600, the lower your odds are. And so I've been meaning to rerun this using flames, or using the kind of inferred distance preference from flames, or fire. Cryptdog, I guess we can call it fire. I don't know why I say flames just instinctively, but there you go. And yeah, so the I was inferring distance preference previously by looking at the kind of mean odds on the long side minus the mean, or sorry, mean odds on the short side minus mean odds on the long side, and that gives you a signal. But what gives you an amazing signal is if you use the mean fire percentage of the short side minus the mean fire percentage of the long side, and you can weight them by the number of races run, and you get like a very clear picture of the kind of distance preference hierarchy of all the horses when you do that.
Yeah.
And Sky, with something like that, a lot of the times what will happen is those horses that get a lot of fire, but I mean, I haven't seen many horses that get fire but don't even place. But the ones that don't win is usually because they're like a distance preference horse that just isn't very strong. So they'll still beat like the majority of non-distance preference horses at like their preferred distance, but they can't beat the ones that are stronger than them. So they just end up getting like third and second or maybe fourth a lot.
Yeah, I don't like. I would want to see an example of a horse with high fire percent that's not ever first, second, or third, because I don't think that happens much aside from just anecdotally with a small number of races. I think with a large data set, you'll find that the fire percentage will match up to the first, second, and third percentage.
The top three, at least, for
top
sure.
Three. Yeah.
They might not win because of the way that it works, but they'll definitely finish in the top two.
Yeah, that's what I mean. First, second, or third. Yeah.
So a couple other profiles that I wanted to show before we jump into some more complicated math that we wanted to talk through. So Ducky is another example of a short preference horse that also pulls strong fire or flames in the middle. You guys threw me off. And then the opposite, or not the opposite, but Vanilla Bean is another one where she has a lot of flames kind of in 1600 through 2000, but because her distance preference isn't as strong at the extreme distances, you see those flames start to fall off at the longer distances where other horses have stronger distance preference.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one is Main Event, who we think is, a high variance horse. And this horse has very limited distance preference because he pulls flames most at 1600, and then the flames fall off on both sides. So that sort of was, an example of what BG was talking about a little bit earlier of that distance preference originating at 1600. There aren't a lot of horses that we've found like Main Event. I'm sure there are others, but I think he's the best example that most people know that show pretty clearly very, very limited or zero distance preference, maybe slight distance preference to 1800 and 2000 here, just because you've got some more flames at those distances and slightly better odds. But
I mean, this is indicative of basically zero distance preference, and you could maybe figure out to what side the very tiny amount of distance preference there is falls on, but distance preference is going to basically like there is like the only two distances that can be a best distance for a horse are 1000 or 2600. right? Like you're biased towards one extreme or the other.
Yep.
And at 1,000, you get if you're a short distance preference horse, 1,000 is where your distance preference seems to be applied most, and then decreasing the closer you get to 1,600, and then not at all at 1,600 because we don't see any evidence that distance preference does anything there. And
that's why you see the odds spike and the flames go to 0 at, with those high distance preference horses, right? So,
and I think something to kind of also keep in mind about this is that, like, even though your horse will be strongest at, say, 1,000, they might need to run at, say, like 1,200, 1,400, where they still get a good dose of distance preference, but maybe they're not as strong as the strongest. It's
right.
You still might have a better distance to run based on what the competition is like.
Absolutely.
But in terms of like the actual base strength of the horse, they will always, like, if a horse has any distance preference, it will always be strongest at the extremes of that distance preference.
Yep. Hey, Bexel, thanks for the resub, man.
Thanks, Bex.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
So, guys, I think we've kind of shown some examples. I guess Dan Shed had one comment about Vanilla Bean. Yes, Vanilla Bean seems to have high variance as well, because of that flame pattern, but because she pulls flames as much as she does at 18 and 100 and 2,000, she likely has some distance preference as well. And because her flame percentage is higher, she likely has, a little bit better base ability than a horse like Main Event does. So that's kind of how we read the flame charts. And I think that segues nicely into, kind of what we wanted to talk about as far as looking at distance preference in more detail and talking about some of the roles and how we think things fit together. So CJBG, I don't know, how do you guys want to jump into that?
Yeah. So I think the one interesting thing that a couple of people have suggested could be true since the last stream I did with y'all is that for the horses that have high distance preference, or for all horses rather, in each race, there is a separate that their distance preference gets modified in some way on a per race basis. And I think that makes intuitive sense to me because without that, no horses have a chance against somebody like the Crimson Chin or these other very high distance preference horses. But it also kind of explains why you get these inverse patterns where if two high distance preference horses go up against each other, if they instead of getting first, second, they'll get 11th, 12th in the opposite order, and it seems to give those non-high distance preference horses a chance in those short and long races. But I'm still kind of in the process of modeling how it might look as a kind of as a calculation. So I just have it's like 3 or 4 different people recently brought up this idea, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when you brought it up first to us and we were talking about how distance preference worked in general. And I think what we kind of typically looked at for how the race engine worked was like you would have your horse, they would have their base strength, and then variance was like a separate role, which was basically like you had a spectrum of performance and you could land kind of somewhere anywhere on that spectrum. And if you landed on the high one, you would win or like do really well. If you landed on the low one, you'd lose, do poorly. And then distance preference was factored in. At first, we kind of like just looked at it as like a flat modifier or maybe a multiplicative modifier on a specific distance, or moving away from 1,600. But then, like you said, the distance preference, the way that the races worked, there was almost like a second layer of variance added to horses with distance preference. So you mentioned like that you think that there's a second role. So like, let's just say if we look at the race as the horses go in, they have their starting ability, and then there's their well, we saw from the article from KYH that there's a global modifier that either makes the race faster or slower, right? Or seems to. And then there's the variance modifier, which is done to each horse individually. But then with the distance preference modifier, and as like say a third role, it makes a lot of sense that they have almost like it's almost like a slanted role where and the reason why it works really well is that usually if you have high distance preference and you roll high, you're going to beat most horses. And that's why even weak distance preference horses will still get fire at their preferred distance over normal horses, because if that roll, say like, let's just say the roll is from 7 down to -3, which is the example I used before, but whatever. If it rolls anywhere from like 2 to 7, you're multiplying the base ability and the distance preference to make it that much stronger. And then what you were saying before was that what didn't really make a lot of sense, and what this helped explain was spike horses and why they always finish so close together, or why they couldn't beat the other one, because most distance preference horses are, the reason why they get that spike at 1600 is because they lack variance, right? Or have very, very low variance. And so what ends up happening is when that roll happens, because they don't have any variance, they're still getting the same amount of strength added to them as the next horse. But if that horse has a higher base ability plus distance preference, then they're never going to be able to beat them. Right. So on the flip side, if there was no such thing as a negative roll or a negative distance preference, then a 1,000 meter sprinter would never be able to beat a 2,400 meter specialist.
Hey, Jovu.
And you would never see the relationship of, even if you can say like the roll goes to 0 only, then you would never see that relationship where the 1,000 meter runner finishes first at 2,400, but the 2,400 runner finishes last. So if you have a negative distance preference and a negative roll at the same time, then it'll flip, right? Like then all of the other horses that don't have sprinting specialists, they will run slower, and then the sprinter will run faster because it's a negative, multiplying their negative distance preference. And one thing that's really interesting is that like people just look at spikers and they're like, oh, there's like a chain, like this spiker could never beat this spiker. But it's not like entirely true, because like there is that level of variance that exists even between spikers, where it's like some have no variance, but some have like a very small amount. So like in the right conditions, if they have the right distance preference roll and the right variance roll, you can see that flipped. Like, for example, you would think of something like Mula Mula is probably the best or second best distance runner in the game, right? Spike horse. And then LBJ Goat is also considered to be like one of the strongest ones, but weaker than Mula Mula. But I have an example of a race where Mula Mula actually, or that LBJ Goat actually beat Mula Mula, and I can send it to you, David. And the only reason this came up is because we were talking about the theory behind how variance and distance preference work. And I was like, well, in theory, if what we're saying is right and these rules apply and variance is then applied as well, you could have a spiker, as long as they had a little bit of variance, be able to beat a horse that is better in that distance but doesn't have as much variance.
Yep. So I think, taking a step back, we've kind of talked about it, but I want to spell it out. What we're talking about is you have base ability plus distance preference, and so your distance preference based on the flames we were kind of showing you earlier. It's harder to isolate that base ability, as we've talked about, for various reasons. But when you have odds, that generally, basically, those odds were correlated with how strong that score was. And then the other factor you have is variance. That's a multiplier on either base ability or the whole puzzle, or the whole score. And that kind of stretches the results or pushes you to the extremes. And so that, I think that kind of ties together what we've been talking about. Before I pull up that Mula race, I wanted to show one race that's a pretty straightforward kind of example of what we're talking about. So this is a 1,000 meter race. And so what you see is you have 3 horses that are all sprint spikers that have pulled flames, and they finished 10, 11, 12. And you actually had the highest odds of the 3 finish last versus, the other 2. And so I think what we're saying, and we'll pull up the Moolah example to see if it shows something similar, that this is an example of, I think what CJ and I would say is a negative distance preference rule. And so you actually have the distance preference being either likely subtracted from the base ability score in this case. And that's why these horses all finish at the bottom. And Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, even though he's not as strong because of odds as doing time, because he likely has higher variance, he, in this case, finished 12th. Hey, Diggas, what's going on, man? Because Whiskey Tango Foxtrot is a good horse, but he likely has higher variance. That's why you see him finishing 12th instead of 11th. And that's an example of how variance might kind of flip results between horses. So CJ,
yeah, and I mean,
go ahead.
One way to look at it is if you ignore variance entirely for a second and you look at a distance preference horse and say that, like, you have 3 horses, each of them have a base ability of 5, and then each of them also have distance preference towards, say, like long distance. One of them has distance preference of 3, one of them has distance preference of 2, and one of them has distance preference of 1. Those horses, or the horse with distance preference 1 will never beat the 2 horses in front of it based on the rolls from the distance preference if they don't have any variance, like any individual variance. Right. So this is almost like a global variance that's added, only applying to horses that have distance preference. And so if it's a negative roll, then they will get that much weaker. And if it's a positive roll, which we think that the rolls are slanted, right? Like that there's much more, a much higher chance of a positive roll than a negative roll. And so the reason I brought this one up is because it's an example of like 2 spike horses, LBJ Goat and Mula Mula. And even though Mula Mula would widely be considered to be the stronger spike horse, LBJ Goat beat it because it also has a certain amount of variance. And you can kind of see the difference in their odds at 1,600, where LBJ Goat doesn't spike quite as much. And like that can be a combination of base ability, but it also suggests that there's a little bit of variance there. And the same thing for Mula Mula. If Mula Mula has any bit of variance, what could end up happening is they get a high distance preference roll that affects all of the horses globally. And then they each have individual variance rolls. And maybe Mula Mula got a low one and LBJ Goat got a high one. But typically speaking, you wouldn't expect this to happen if they were facing each other based on how distance preference works.
But to hit on another example of what you were talking about, if we're looking at horses like Ecology or Malawi Gold, who pull 30 to 40 odds and still get flames, that's the example that we were talking about earlier of likely having, similar base abilities with, lower variance, and then similar distance preference, but the horse with the better odds has just high enough distance preference to push those horses all the way out. And so that, to your point, that those horses that are getting 30, 40 odds are never going to beat those top horses, but you see them finish 1 or 2 spots, 1 or 2 spots behind if that top horse is winning and gets a successful distance preference roll, or 1 or 2 spots ahead if it's flipped and it's a negative distance preference roll.
Yeah, and that's all based on how the different distance preference roles work and the amount of distance preference that they have. It's basically like BJ has said, like distance preference horses or spiker horses are just horses that derive almost all of their performance from distance preference.
Right.
So if they don't have any variance and they just have distance preference, the horse that has more distance preference will almost always beat the horse that has less distance preference, or always if there's no variance.
Right. So
yeah, I can. So I've been attempting to make this visual because it's so hard to talk about it with words sometimes.
Yeah.
So I can share a little preview of that. Let's see if I can share my screen here. All right, can y'all see this?
I will add it.
There we go. So this is one interpretation of how ZED could work, right? We've talked about distance preference. For simplicity, I just wrote it here as negative for short and a positive for long, and then 0 in the middle for horses with low or no distance preference. So you might imagine a horse with a little bit of difference. So you can see a little bit of difference on their short flames versus long flames or fire in one direction. Might be, somewhere in the middle here. And then somebody like the Crimson Chin is like way over here, like super short. And
Moolah is all the way on the other side.
Yeah. So I don't have the visualization for how that applies yet, but you can imagine that if you slam this over here short and you slam this over here long, that then changing the race distance is going to change these normal distributions, we have our base ability here. This is basically the idea is like you can run 1,000 sims of a version of a racing simulation, right? I'd love to have some text boxes over here where you can just write, a line or two of JavaScript and then put in how you think it works. Right? Like what's the modifier for distance preference? What's the modifier for base ability? How much do each of those things add to the formula? So to basically give people a sandbox so that they can kind of play around with things and see if it matches the results they're seeing in the races. That's the goal. But you can kind of see what variability does, it's not super obvious how these things interact, which is why I let's see. Open dev tools here.
Okay, quit spamming chat.
So the simulate button, I didn't code the UI for it or anything. This is like I got bored in a meeting the other day and did this in like an hour. So this actually will run 1,000. Basically, it just samples from these normal distributions 1,000 times. Tells you which horse had the higher pick, basically, and then it just grabs a random one single instance and tells you who had the higher. It's a dimensionless number, but who had the higher power, I guess.
Right.
So in this case, for 1,000 races or simulations or whatever this is, because it's a very simple algorithm at this point. Our horse one won 352 of those. Our horse two won 648 of those. You can just convert those to percentages, 35.2 and 64.8%. But in the one we sampled randomly, the horse that only won 35.2% of those actually won the quote unquote race. So it kind of it helps you kind of hone in on your understanding of how those normal distributions of base ability and variability might interact with each other. Yeah, I really want to kind of make it a sandbox for people to play with, because I don't think we'll ever know exactly how Zed's race algorithm works.
Right.
We can infer many things. Like we could go back and kind of back into what we think the distance preference rules are for every race that's happened in the game. We may or may not be accurate at that task, but we can kind of incrementally understand further and further how that race algorithm works, and then add it to a tool like this, and get closer and closer to recreating those simulations.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing to call out. I mean, we're kind of saying, talking about all of this tonight. This is our interpretation of what we're seeing with the data that we have, right? With odds data, with flames data, how horses stack up. We're trying to explain things like, magnet spikers. We're trying to explain things like, spikers versus other pattern horses, who's pulling flames and what that looks like. And so, yeah, I mean, BG, I know we've talked about this privately, but I think this tool will be great as you kind of continue to develop it and get the distance preference working here, and even better if you can put those buttons and the and the kind of customized fields here to let people play around with them. I think,
absolutely, yeah. The kind of fields to enter your own kind of logic, and then a way to kind of share that logic with people. I'm gonna have to sandbox it somehow, or else somebody could just put evil JavaScript in there. So it might need a DSL or something. So we'll figure out how to do that safely before we can enable sharing. But
that sounds good.
Until then, people can record a movie or something.
So what else, CJ, BG, what else did you guys want to talk through as far as racing goes? I mean, I think we've kind of hit on a lot about distance preference. We've kind of hit on variance and then how the factors work together. We've talked about some of these profiles and kind of how things look to us. Anything else that we kind of want to go over at this point?
I mean, I'm always happy to kind of answer questions with data. So I have my whole data set up to date as of like 2 hours ago. So happy to do that. We can look at various stats and whatnot. Yeah, I don't think there was anything else on my list specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, same. I was just more interested in kind of like getting like the idea of what we've been talking about for distance preference and how we think it kind of like works with the secondary role, so that people can kind of play with that and see what they think of it. To me, it makes a lot of logical sense. It's why you see those kind of like those inverse placements between high distance preference horses, but they don't get lower odds because they still have a high chance of winning if they get that like negative distance roll. But then there's still a lot of different things to explore. Like you guys were saying, we don't know how it works. This is just kind of like the way that we think that it works based on like conversations we've had, based on the data we've looked at, based on results from races involving these horses. So yeah, it's just kind of something to put out there. The next thing I think that could be interesting to look into is all those like normalized times and things like that, because I know BG has a theory about some of the time stuff, and I know that we know for sure that the times are being kind of manufactured and changed and made to be kind of closer than they're. Like you don't have a ZED or a ZED whatever 100 cross running 10 seconds slower than the weakest horse in class 5, which in theory, if you're going to keep getting weaker and weaker and worse, then they should be running a lot slower than other. There's caps on the times for sure, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we can open it up to questions about data. We can do whatever. I just hopefully with all the stuff pieced together about what some people are working on for different things involving the race simulation, we can kind of get a better idea of of how it actually works, and then BG can plug it into his simulation, and we can all benefit from it.
Sky had a great suggestion of picking horses and dropping them into the kind of simulator based on their, our assessment of, their base ability and standard deviation and whatnot, which would be really cool.
Is that doable?
Yeah, that's absolutely doable. Cryptog, I don't know if you saw when I was sharing my screen, I had Haku up in a tab for you, but
see, the problem, Cryptog, is that you don't have those filters that we've been asking for.
Everything that we're talking about, is.
I will say I do go to
so
I do go to Haku first, and then if the graphs I need aren't there, then I go to Know Your Horses. I'm a Haku first kind of guy.
So Bex, like a horse like that, it's not so much that their speed, like they're not still running slower than like say like the slowest races ever, right? Like they're still getting times that are consistent with 12th place, but in theory, because they're so weak, they should be running slower than that, right? Like the slowest class 1 horse shouldn't be running as slow as the slowest class 5 horse or like the weakest horse in the game. Unless there's some kind of like fudging of the speed. And so what you're saying is like pacers that get 12th place 40% of the time is probably because they have just such a high drop in their base ability where it's either almost non-existent or it's just really, really low relative to all the horses that they're running against. So even if they have a huge amount of variance, they're still going to finish in last most of the time. And if they don't, they're still going to finish in last most of the time because they're so weak. Actually, I think BG found like the weakest horse in the game at one point.
I forget who it was now.
Take it easy, Cryptogs. Thanks for stopping in. Sorry.
No, I forget who it was. That'd be fun to find that again. But yeah, like the record was just abysmal, and that was basically kind of so we reversed into that by looking at class mean as a proxy for base ability. Which is controversial because it can be affected by your what the class you start in. So we use a high number of races to kind of limit how much of an effect that has. And like Dan just said, yeah, there's race management can play a role in that. If people sandbag, but on average, over many races, the average class that you're in seems to kind of match what we would expect an ability distribution to look like from Genesis racehorses, meaning Genesis Z10s end up in the bottom of class 5 and Genesis Z1s end up at the top of class 1. And it's pretty linear in between. So if you use those class means and then you look at every horse in the game and you look at the class means of their parents, and you also have to limit this to parents with a certain number of races for it to be accurate. And so like the one great thing about how many horses we have in the game now is that there's many more data points. And so we're starting to see things we couldn't see before. Where the hell was I going with this? All right, yeah. So you can work backwards from the parent class mean to the child class mean, and of course there are outliers, right? But we see a kind of normally distributed curve of child class mean to the average of the parents' class means. And like if the child lucks out and has great distance preference, and the owner of the horse realizes that and races it correctly, it can end up in a class higher than its parents. But on average, they tend to be just slightly less than the average of the parent classes.
I think something interesting too to look at is just if you isolate the horses that are not heavy distance preference horses, you probably get a clearer picture of their correlation to their parents because they're not being affected by distance preference as much.
Yeah.
And yeah, do you have that scatter chart actually, the one that you showed me with that showed the correlation between parents and offspring?
Of just class mean?
Yeah.
No, but I can reconstruct it real quick.
Cool. Yeah, Sky. So discovery is kind of an interesting thing. It's not really like a cut and dry concept where you just do one thing for each horse. It really depends on how strong the horse is, on if you're trying to keep it down in class. But I definitely think running it at multiple distances is always good, especially now with flames, because you don't really have a relative baseline for how strong the horse is with odds like you used to. So as long as your horse can pull out some wins and pull some fire in different distances, I would run it at least a few times at each distance to kind of get a good idea. Because honestly, like some horses, just because of the way that distance preference works, they have an easier time going down at 2,200 than maybe 2,400. And that's just maybe because they're competing with more horses to go down at 2,400 and vice versa.
Yeah. I think that the way I look at it, not that I race as much as I used to, but whenever I'm starting out with new horses, I always try to do a short, a middle, and a long. So 1,000, 1,200, a 16, 18, and or a 22, 24 pretty immediately. And if just to see if any of those pull flames, because to Dan's point, kind of figuring out where a horse doesn't flame or does flame is, I think, is more important. Then the only thing that throws that off is for high variance horses, you may have to run a few more races if you don't flame anywhere to figure out a few more 250s to figure out kind of where you need to land. But if you do pull flame somewhere, you can run an opposite distance and go from there. So I wanted to flip back to some of these other questions. But before I did that, I wanted to run one filter. So bear with me while I do that, please.
Yeah, I got the class mean stuff ready for whenever you want to see that as well.
Sparkle, sparkle.
Let's see. So I would actually argue, since we were talking about, of course, Cryptog left before we could show off his baby on stream. I do like to use this all horses filter that he has. And because you can take, instead of just looking at the ones that are listed, you can look at, every horse in the game and then go from there. So I don't know which generation some of these horses are, but I would argue that a pacer that's run over 100 races with these kind of flame percentages and win percentages are probably some of the worst horses in the game. Just to kind of round that argument out. And if you look, I mean, that's kind of what we were talking about. Land horse, sorry to the owner there, 70 12ths out of 260 races. And what is this? Failing at my math test on stream, 164 races in the bottom four. I mean, that's a pretty strong negative performance there. So that was one thing I wanted to show. Gags had a question about a race, or wanted to point out a race. I guess I know, Gags, this has been a while. We kind of flipped away from it, but did you have a specific question on this race?
I think he was just using it as an example.
It's
how the distance preference
similar,
chain
right?
is working.
Yeah, it's similar to that 1,000 meter that we showed. So this is 2,400 meters, and you've got three strong long distance horses that all pulled similar odds that finished 10, 11, 12. And so that would be another example of that base preference role, that opposite base preference role that we were talking about.
Yeah, I think the best way to kind of like look at things, at least for me personally, is that each race has its own set of variables. So that variance is a singular role for each horse, and it's unique to each horse. You have the global role, which is what we're kind of learning to be like race normalization. So some races run faster than others, some races run slower. but within that race, like all of the horses are affected equally. And then you have distance preference, which is kind of like a global modifier on an individual variable, if that makes sense. So by combining all of those things together, you can kind of figure out why a horse performed the way that it did in any given race. If those are, I mean, like if that is the way that it works, the way that we think it does. And it seems to, I mean, it does make sense, because that example that I found of LBJ Goat beating Mula Mula was not something that I knew about beforehand. It was like a discussion I was having in a chat where we were talking about the spike chain, and I was like, well, in theory, a spike horse could beat another spike horse that it's weaker than if it has like a slightly higher amount of variance, and it just kind of like lucks into the highest possible variance while the other horse doesn't. And so then I went looking for this kind of race in that chain, and I found it, and it kind of like, obviously it doesn't like prove a theory, but it kind of like helps support the idea that exists.
Yep. Flipping back to some of these questions from a few minutes ago, Brownie Trout, you had a question or comment about Professor Maddie. So, adding this one to stream. So if you look at the overall performance, looks to be, to me, and CJ and BG, you guys can hop in, but looks to me that she's had more races in some of the middle distances. She looks to be a very high variance horse. I would expect these flame percentages in the out distances to come down. These are probably only in class 5. And then the specific performance at 1600, to me, looks like she's just kind of outperforming her odds or her ability at this point. And that, you've been getting some pretty positive variance rolls to start off with. So I would, she probably will have her best performance at 1600 because she does look to be a high variance, low distance preference horse. But I would expect to see this start to you. CJ, I don't know if you have the same interpretation. I know you're looking at this thing for the first time, just like I am.
Yeah, I'm I'm looking at Professor Maddie, and I'm wondering if it isn't like a very slight distance preference geared towards long distance, kind of like a vanilla bean type profile. Yep. Definitely high variance, but sorry about that. My dog is going a little bit crazy. The way that I look at it, is kind of what you're saying. It's a high distance preference. I don't know that it's outperforming. So it had pretty low odds early on. I would have to look at the individual races between, say, like 2000 and 2200 to see kind of like where you're getting flames. And I mean, just judging by some of the races, which are like, it looks like there's like a $15 buy-in in class 5. You have $20 buy-in in class 5 with pretty low odds. I think it probably is like a slightly long distance preference horse with high variance as well. Yeah.
And the question was specifically about 1600 though. And I even though those odds were decent to start with, I think it had about 8 or 8.5 odds in a couple early races. They were, class 5 races. So
yeah, when I looked at 1600 specifically, it actually is almost like an L shape. And it has won a couple bigger pots in class 5, and it has run some in class 4. I don't know if it's won any of the class 4 races though. So, sorry, go ahead.
Brownie wants you to look at the speed chart specifically.
The speed charts? I'm not good at looking at speed stuff. I don't typically look at any speed stuff when I'm evaluating horses. If somebody else wants to look at them and maybe give an idea.
I'll pull them up. I mean, I think this is a pretty good indication of our argument that speed doesn't really tell the whole story, because this chart is showing that in a relatively good sample of races, 37 races, she's slower than average, and yet she has 9 wins. So, 25% winner at a distance that she's pretty noticeably slower than average. So I think that goes back to our argument that, normalized speed may be a good barometer, but until those races are normalized, this really doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I like the horseshoe option. Click on that.
Yeah, I haven't even seen that yet.
I haven't seen that either.
Yeah.
Was that recently added?
It must have been. Horseshoe on the left, right under speed stats.
Yeah, it's like
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, so it just shows all of the I think it looks like it just separates all the placement profiles for all the distances.
Oh, okay, nice. I like that.
Which is, I like that too, because then you can filter it individually, or instead of having to filter by individual distance, you can just filter by entry fee and class. I like that a lot. That's really useful. Yeah, thanks for bringing that to our attention, Mandalorian.
Yeah.
I've also been working on a way to kind of show all of a horse's performance by length, class, and fee tier in the same view to kind of give you that global overview that I think everybody wants. So nothing I can show yet other than like my napkin doodles. But the idea is that you want to be able to compare one horse against another horse or get a kind of overview of the patterns of your own horse. So that's another kind of thing I have that's in a buried at the bottom of a drawer somewhere.
Well, do you want to talk about the theory you have in regards to the spread of horses, or no?
Well, so I pulled up the class mean stuff if you want to go through that, because I do have that chart ready.
The only reason I was mentioning that is because of Mr. Sponti and his horse, and he's saying that like the speed of his horse is lower than what it should be if it's running against strong competition and winning.
Oh yeah,
But I think again, speed for me is just like, there's so much noise going on that I just don't find it reliable. I don't find it reliable as an indicator of performance.
Yeah, I added 2 operations to the times recently. One based on the KYH blog, where they basically normalize everything by the population mean speed. But then I went a step further and I actually normalized by the population spread as well. So those both improve the signal somewhat, but there's still a lot of noise. And I think that goes to what you were saying earlier, CJ, about like if you put the donkiest horse in the game in a class 1 race with the 11 best horses in the game, you would expect, like in real life, if that happened, that donkey horse is going to be trailing way behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it doesn't work that way in ZED.
No.
And it also doesn't work the way where, like, okay, say the gap is only 5 seconds, but maybe in real life you'd expect like the 11 horses that are great to be bunched at the at the short end and the donkey horse to be at the tail end. No, we see them kind of more spread out within that range. So the kind of fudging that ZED does to give us entertaining numbers destroys a lot of the signal that you can recover from speed. So
and kind of to that point too is something that we talked about a little bit before, with in terms of like Roid Rager and Escobar and all those things, and like none of them have any of the fastest times ever run. If you're talking about at least from what ZED explained, was that they had the sets of the DNA from 4 horses instead of 2, you would expect them to have all of the fastest times because they would just be like literally twice as strong as like the next strongest horse. Now, I mean, like they ran fast because they were winning a lot, but still, like when I have a class 5 $250 grinder that has run a faster time than Roid Rager, I think like you can safely assume that there's some stuff going on with the speed.
Yeah, and I meant to check and see if the post normalized step for those horses were like fastest ever. Because you'd expect them to change somewhat, but I haven't done that. But I will walk you through this real quick.
Yeah, please.
So this on the left here we have the mean class of the given horse, and on the right, on the y-axis class mean of the horse, x-axis the averaged parent class mean, and there's a very strong correlation here. R squared of 524 or sorry, 522. And that the simple way of saying that is that the average of the parent class mean explains 52% of the variation in the child class mean. And you know, to look at some of these dots, you know, we have one down here where both parents are in class 1 and the child is in class 1, and that pattern holds kind of in general. But then like you get lots of horses where you know, you know, 2.5 or 2.5 class mean parents, and the child's in class 5. And I think that correlation, that R squared, would go up if you know, there were classes below 5, because I think that pattern, like a lot of these are kind of artificially at the bottom of class 5. And just sense. for completeness, this is all horses with at least 30 races where the parents both had at least 30 races as well. But then while we were talking, I was thinking, like, there is a measure that let's see if I have rating versus parent rating, or where parent average mean rating.
While you're pulling that up, what do you think is the right number of classes? I know Koenigsreich had an interesting poll on Twitter that he posted earlier about the number of classes. I've always said, to me, like 7. You add 2 to the bottom. You know, give some 250s and some maybe a few $5 sprinkled in there to let some of the lower, you know, the lower end class 5 horses, you know, run. But I definitely don't want to see it at 10. I think that's too many. What do you guys think?
I don't know. It almost makes sense to have it be dynamic, or, you know, based on the
spread of the horses, or the spread of the abilities.
Yeah, I agree, because the thing is, like, as more and more horses are bred, in theory, if you're breeding like the weakest horses together continuously, they're either going to be like, if you want to have a place for them to be able to run, then there's going to need to be like a continuous, you know, kind of like stream of classes that are created for weaker and weaker horses. Otherwise, they're just kind of useless, right? Well, yeah. We see that already, but
yeah, and I don't know like whether it makes sense for the economy if things work that way, or for like the way the game is played. But if like, we think that's how breeding works, right? Like, there is some decay with every generation, and Zed even kind of talks about that in their lore with the, you know, the genetic purity and all of that stuff. And like, we see that with the class mean, like, really strongly, right? Like, majority of horses end up in lower classes than their parents. And so if you're breeding Z268s together, like, it's going to be a pretty crappy horse. Like, it could still, like, Zed's always like, oh yeah, no, you could still breed a winner, but it's those random components, like the distance preference and the variability, that would have to be very high for it to be a contender.
I mean, I imagine for like a cross like that, you would have to have, like, not only would you have to have like the maximum distance preference just to make it into class 5, but you'd also have to have like a high dose of variance on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we do see horses that are kind of bred from crappy parents who do end up winning with both of those things. I don't actually have the stat I need to make this comparison. I have the parent averaged mean rating, and what I need is the parent average rating. So I don't actually have a stat for that. I'm gonna add it to my to-do list. But you can see that the mean rating and the parent averaged mean rating, there is some correlation. But I think if we looked at the rating and the parent average rating, we would also we would see a higher correlation. Yeah.
Hey, Golden Glow, thanks for the sub, man. Thanks for the resub.
Hey, thanks, Golden Glow. Thanks for coming by.
What you also made a comment about wanting the game to be a game of discovery, though. Do you think that would change if we had more than 5 classes, or was there a separate comment that we made that kind of prompted that?
Oh, are you talking about what I just said?
No, Golden Glow Master, you can pull up his comment if you want. Yeah, and I mean, like, I think that this is kind of a way of making it a game of discovery a lot more than if you had like very specific breeding patterns and stuff like that. Like, each horse, you're not going to know ahead of time if a horse is a good racer or not, right? Like, and 95% of them are not going to be. And yeah, having extra classes would allow you to use more horses and find a place for more horses. Now, I think that they had talked about adding different types of races, like, you know, different weather and track types and stuff like that. I think that that's probably,
yeah,
you know, in the future quite a bit still. I would guess, just based on what they still need to do to make the current racing functional, you know, to an acceptable level, to a level that we all kind of like hope for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be mad at 10 classes. Like at the end of the day, like I think I agree with what BJ was saying, where it's just like if you scale it based on the population, and I think that's what they do in a lot of games.
I guess 7 is the short term, right? I could see us getting to 10 at some point, but I don't. 10 feels too soon to me to go to right now. Is kind of where my head's at. Like maybe when we get to 150 or 200,000 horses, then it makes sense to add a few more classes to let those horses continue to spread out and give, especially as more exclusives, more elites, more horses are bred down the line that are going to have lower base ability, you know, find homes for those horses. So but BG, I want to be mindful of time. I don't know if you have
you said you had to get going.
I got 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. So some things I think don't need a class system. Like I see some like extracurricular races happening, right? Like donkey races, races for horses that have never had a win, races with horses that have a lower win percentage than some amount. And I think, you know, everybody's going to be like, oh, you know, I have one of those. I can chuck it in that race and then get some enjoyment out of that. So in the absence of a class system that works for like the ultra donkeys, I feel like they can still be useful in some ways. And I would still love to see some kind of deflationary measure. You know,
absolutely.
put them in the grinder and get some glue coin and use that for renames or whatever else.
Glue machine.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, burning would be great. You know, something that will also add to all that is that once we're able to do, say, like private races of some kind, and set our own parameters for races in some kind of, you know, I don't know if you want to call it like an arcade mode or whatever. I think that'll also add some level of usability for horses that are just like not competitive in a competitive atmosphere.
I think an intermediate step there before we get to private racing, though, is, you know, and Snooze mentioned it, is that those 0 and 5% win races, even though you could see some people, you know, take advantage of those to some extent, although it's tough to do, and it's almost impossible, if not impossible, to have a profitable horse at a 5% win rate. You know, you could those would almost fill the spot for those donkey races, right? So, you know, it would be great to have some classes added onto the bottom to give those horses a more consistent home to race in the long term. But I think you know, as a stopgap, that I know we've had some debates about 5% and how much of the ecosystem should be taken up by those races, but I think that's another positive, you know, step that ZED has announced that they'll take at some point, that could help with that. So FL Dash, appreciate the sub, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. I wasn't sure if somebody had called that out or not, but yeah, BG, was there anything else you wanted to share before, or did anybody have a question for BG before he has to take off? I
did want to say, Gold Glowmaster, happy to talk anytime. Just hit me on Twitter, which is BG_alt. That's my Twitter. It's my hidden.
Yeah, BG is a legend.
Crypto Twitter.
That's right.
So somebody asked if this was a Janome sewing machine earlier. It is. It's my girlfriend's sewing machine.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm not in the barn tonight. I'm in the sewing shack.
Sewing room.
The sewing room. Yeah.
All right, BG. Well, really appreciate you coming on, man. Really appreciate all the stats you put together as always, and especially, you know, the insight that you have and kind of what you add to you're a lot of the horsepower behind some of the theories that we claim. So, you know, really appreciate your help with everything.
Yeah, always happy to help. If anybody has questions, hit me on Twitter. You can usually answer them pretty quickly. And yeah, love talking to y'all. Hope to be on again soon. And I'm gonna go play some poker.
Yeah, man.
All right.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Yep.
Take it easy, BG.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, the VOD will be available. And on top of that, we did just start up our YouTube. I think I tweeted out about that. Our YouTube is up, and we're not doing anything fancy. We're not like cutting into like special edits or effects. I mean, that may be sometime in the future, but for now, we're just taking the VOD directly from Twitch or StreamYard and just porting it right into YouTube.
Sky, I really appreciate the 6-month sub, man. You didn't have to.
Oh, wow. Yeah, thank you
That's
so
awesome.
much. Really appreciate that.
Now, so we're gonna stay on. Yeah, CJ, do you want to drop BG's Twitter?
Yeah, I'll
link
pull that up
into
right
the
now.
chat. Yeah, we're gonna stay on. I think this is a perfect break while CJ's pulling up the BG's Twitter. We're gonna stay on and answer questions. We're gonna kind of hit on some of the other questions that have popped up over the last 10 or 15 minutes that we haven't hit on. And then we'll continue over the next half hour or so, 45 minutes, to continue answering some more questions. CJ, you hit my kind of break, what I wanted to announce. So we mentioned on Twitter earlier that we're going to kind of share some more content. Obviously, if you were looking for the VODs on Twitch, those get taken down in 2 weeks, unless you're a partner, which we're not quite there yet. So we're going to transition a lot of those historical VODs over to YouTube, and we'll also share some additional information there. So they are going to be uncut at this point, but at least the breeding one is up now. The controversial breeding stream, and some of these other ones that you're seeing. A couple weeks ago we talked about regulations in terms of service. I'm blanking on what we talked about last week, CJ, but basically all the normally.
Did we stream last week?
Streams. Yeah, last Thursday we talked about something. I don't even remember. So we'll get those posted, and so you guys will be able to go back through those and again hop into our Discord if you have any questions about that. And then the other piece was we both had interviews with NFT Insights with Bunrio, who's in chat and been asking some questions and making some comments. Great guy. He has CJ and I both had interviews with him, and we've linked them in various places, but I'll make sure to tweet those out on our main Twitter account, just if you want to watch those. And he's got a ton of other interesting content with a lot of other of the much more prominent content creators in the space. He
did great interviews with, say, like MJ. We always like to shout out MJ's great guy. He did a great interview with Arbitrage. There's a lot of really good stuff on his ZED Insight YouTube. So if you can check that out, yeah, that'd be great. He's a really good guy, and I think his is more like he likes to take a much more like unbiased stance and kind of provide everybody's theories and everybody's take and give them a platform. So I think that's really great for the game.
Yep. And Cincher Bose and a lot of those other guys, so yeah, definitely check him out. We'll link it on our Twitter. I think CJ, you posted some of those links yesterday.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So, let's see. So we've talked about a lot of stuff. I want to get back into some of these questions. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Get Me Quickly is still around. I don't know if we have a great answer for you without knowing the specific horse. So if you're still around and you want to talk about a specific horse, just drop the name in chat and we can definitely talk through that one with you. Take a look and see if we can give you some advice there.
Yeah, and if not, guys, like we are always around in our Discord, which is linked at the bottom of our profile on Twitch. So if you guys ever have any specific questions for us, or if you want to just come in and chat, like we're trying to build a community that's open to everybody. So come by, hang out, it'll be fun. And yeah, that way, if you have any questions or maybe you can't catch the stream while it's live, we're happy to try and help you guys along that way. I think I spent like after the ZED Insight interviews came out, we had a steady stream of new people, and we spent most of the day or two afterwards just answering questions for people and like doing horse analysis. So we're always happy to help if time permits.
Yeah, CJ, I'll give you props there. I mean, you were a little bit more active than I was. My work has been
you're busy
crazy,
with work,
but we're trying to be as active as we can and really help you guys out as much as you can. So that Discord link is down there, below, and feel free to pop in and ask whatever questions. We've got a lot of other guys that are floating around, Gags you've seen, and My Blood, and a bunch of other guys in there that are more than happy to help with questions as well. So
I've stopped trying to name individual people because I'm always worried I'm going to forget somebody.
Yeah. Well, those are just the two that I've been chatting. So if anybody wants some a shout out, they need to drop their name in chat.
But yeah, Tsunami, I think I was looking at your horse before. Sparkle, was that the one that you're talking about? Yeah, it looks like a beast of a long distance runner, right? Pretty sure that's what it was. Yeah, won a nice big pot in class 4 against Chandravali. So I mean, at the very least, decent. I would try and maybe, if you can, start working on the other side of the distance and bring it down to try and keep it in class 4. If you can, you'll have a much wider range of races available to you that way. Plus, you still haven't maybe necessarily run against some of the real big spikers. So it's really hard to say just how strong it is, but definitely if you're stronger than Chandravali, it looks pretty strong.
I would say it's worth running the short distance races to try to bring down, and it's also worth potentially testing at 1800 in a decent, maybe a $5 or $10 buy-in against some horses that pull flames at 1800, because that'll help you see if it's a spiker or potentially see if it's a spiker or if it's just a ledge or a longer distance without that spike at 1600. Let's see. Continuing to work through the chat. I think we're kind of getting caught up.
Yeah. Does anybody have any other? Yeah. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for all the subs, all the participation too. Like we love to kind of like play off the chat and be able to answer questions and do analysis for people.
I think there was one that was asked a few minutes ago. Again, I don't know if Go Beeves is still around. I would not say that I have a hard time saying, and I think CJ would agree, that any breeding is a waste of money. Butyrin breeding fees are lower than others for a reason. And so, especially if you're breeding in stable, those fees are pretty low. You have relatively low risk. Even if you're breeding out of stable, as long as you're sticking with, finding, minimum studs or slightly above minimum studs, then, those horses will likely have lower base ability, based on what we were talking about with BG earlier. But if you find a strong Butyrin stud, then, you could have a decent Z19 or Z20. Or if you get lucky with the randomized variants, if you get a horse with strong variants, then you could get a horse that could perform pretty well. So I don't think there's anybody that'll tell you that you shouldn't breed horses together as long as you're not, spending half an ETH for a Z19 or a Z20 legendary. So CJ, what do you think?
So I guess my take on it is it all depends on your goal, right? So if you're going to breed legendaries like that together, I would highly recommend doing it in-house so that you can just like lower the cost for yourself. But look, there's lots of great exclusives out there that were bred from from low legendaries or high legendaries, I should say, back into Genesis, back into like the beauty of the way that the formula works right now is if you still have one high base ability parent, because it averages it out, you still have the opportunity to come back up into the pyramid, right? So I think that when you're looking at the breeding, it's really more about your goals and what you're trying to accomplish. Like if you're trying to sell, you just kind of have to follow the market in that way. Look at the cost effectiveness of what you're doing in terms of does it make sense for you to breed if it costs you this much and you can only sell for this much unraced or this much raced or whatever. If you're breeding to try and find racers, well, then you got to look at, where do I want my base ability point to start and how lucky do I feel? Because at the end of the day, you can have the perfect combination of base ability, and if you fail on that lottery for variance and distance preference, then you're still going to have a shit racer. Sorry. Oh yeah, I can swear. The thing is it's just, I would never say that breeding is useless or like pointless, right? It's just, it's good to be deliberate and know the goal before you start breeding. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All I was just going to say is just that you have to know the options available to you and knowing like, there are some pacers out there that are pretty strong racers in class 5 and class 4. I've seen a cross go all the way up to class 3, a beater and cross. So, I mean, it really just depends.
Yeah. And I think, Snooze's comment is kind of in that same vein about it seems like a bad idea to breed right now. I mean, look, the market is not where it was 2 weeks ago. I think a lot of that is due to the racing atmosphere and the uncertainty around what a good racer's worth or what a mediocre racer's worth, or what the racing environment will look like going forward. I think if we get stamina rolled out soon, in the next few days, we should start to see the market at least flatten or start to recover. But that said, I mean, the volume is still there. It's just the prices are coming down, right? And I think some of that is demand for fresh horses, demand for racers. But if demand was too low, you wouldn't still have the volume of horses that are transacting 700, 800 horses a day. If demand was down as much as some people would say it is. That said, to kind of reiterate what CJ said, it is important now to try to be more selective. Not that we know a ton about breeding, but try to be more selective with your breeding and really pick your spots with the market the way it is. So let's see. Sorry, guys, trying to work through. You really appreciate the active
lots of questions
to work through and answer. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm the same as you, Coney Great Enterprises. I don't breed to sell. I breed I have sold horses that I've bred, but I always race them first, and if I'm selling a horse, it's just to kind of buy back in. I was just kind of ignoring this, but
do we want to talk about this?
Well, I don't. I mean, like, I don't really.
So what I would say
give
is
attention to it.
Sure. Well, I mean, it gets attention, right? So it's worth talking about for a second. What I would say is, if you have some time, our breeding stream is up on YouTube, and then the NFT Insights podcasts that we'll link on our Twitter are both up, and it is a good bit of listening content. But if you've got a drive or you've got some downtime during the day or something you want to listen to in the background, I think I would suggest checking those out. You'll get 4 to 5 hours of content on a lot of breeding and thoughts there. The way I explained this in my interview with NFT Insights ZED Insights was there are plenty of examples of horses that had 3 or 4 good kids out of their first 3 or 4 breeds. And then since then, they've had 3 or 4 of the worst kids in the game. 0% winners, very, very low flame percentages, if any, more than 10 races, more than 20 races, more than 30 races in some cases. So there is an element in my mind of I always look at the kids. I don't think CJ ever looks at the kids. I always look at the kids because I want to know kind of what the max potential has been in the past. But it is never the sole factor that I look at. The average class that we've talked about, the placement patterns and the race performance that we talked about in our stream, and we talked about a little bit more in the podcast. I think that's kind of what we look at. So it's a little bit longer response than I expected it to be, but CJ, any other comments? I think I summarized.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't look at children in the sense of like how well they perform in races. If I look at the children of any offspring, I'll look at like what their average, like if they're putting out a lot of children, I look at like where those children fall in terms of like their average class, because that's usually going to be a good indication of how strong they are, because we know or we assume that we know at least that variance and distance preference are always randomly assigned at birth. So the race performance of children relative to their parents is not in my opinion, is not a good way to measure how good of a breeder that parent is. And reverse engineering how strong of a breeder that horse is based on their offspring's race performance should have no signal, because that would be completely luck. Like it would just all be luck, because again, the only thing that you can really control about a horse when you breed it is how strong of a starting point it gets. But if it doesn't get variance and distance preference, the highest base ability horse in the game could constantly breed duds, right? And we see that a lot in the top echelons of horses, where a lot of Z1s have a lot of really bad offspring, and I shouldn't say bad in the sense that they're weak, but they're weak relative to the racing field that they're in. So thanks to Andy, I really appreciate that. Yeah, check out David's as well. You did a really good one. Zed, we said it a few times already tonight, but Zed Insight's a great resource, and everybody should check out. Yeah, exactly, Golden Glow. But we've seen that he has the potential to breed strong horses. It's just a matter of when that variance and distance preference are randomly assigned after breeding. You just got to hope that you're getting a high dose, and if not, then hope that you're getting a lot of pass down so that you can breed the offspring.
Yep. So Pezza had a question about Demon Fighter.
Yeah, I took a look at that horse. It looks like a ledge.
Yep.
Or that would be, so we talk about profiles sometimes on this stream. A ledge is it's like a strong distance preference horse, but one that also has a decent amount of variance. Yep. So,
but I think in this case, just based on the flames, it's likely more variance and less distance preference.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, or just like a really strong dose of both. Because I think is it an exclusive? Sorry, I took it down. Yeah. So and he does pretty well.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty strong, pretty good racer, I should say. Most of your races should probably be, in my opinion, when you have like a high variance one, it depends on how much distance preference there is there, but 2200 is usually a pretty good spot for it. And you're gonna go down pretty easily at 1000 and 1200, especially since you have high variance.
Right. So this horse, obviously, without looking at some of the Class 4 races that it's in, this horse is getting a little close to Class 3. It looks like you have pretty strong performance in Class 4. confirm that before I move on.
Yeah, and just to kind of like touch on while you're looking for that, Zoo Andy, what you're asking about with the market and the massive amount of falls. Honestly, until they fix stamina, right now is probably the cheapest time you're going to find a strong racer where people are just kind of like either giving up on them early because there's not enough information out there and they don't like really understand what they have, or just like people are getting really fed up with racing in a kind of a tedious environment. So they're just selling horses for cheaper than you would typically get when you could make more money racing. So, I mean, I know that I have bought like 7 or 8 different racers that were 0.3 or lower recently. Yeah, I mean, like the deals are there. If you, and then here's the thing is like, I would never advise anyone to go out and buy horses. I would never advise anyone to sell horses. My whole thing is that like, right now the prices are really good if you are long on ZED. So if you think that ZED is going to be successful in the future, it's highly unlikely that prices can get much lower than they are right now. I mean, like they will, or they could, but I just don't see how much lower.
For legendary and some exclusive horses.
Yeah, for bred horses, and for racers especially, because like if you assume that the racing environment is going to be fixed, if stamina is going to be updated to allow horses to run more often, then the potential to make more money is there, right? So if you're making more money racing, then racers become more valuable. So I really, at least good and identifiable racers right now will probably never be cheaper than what they are right now in the current environment.
Yep.
That's not financial advice, just my opinion and my observation based on how the racing environment is currently.
I agree. I think there are a lot of average to good racers out there for pretty dang cheap. I think there are a lot of horses out there that are, the floors have come down across the board, and we feel like if stamina is implemented soon and implemented well, or even if it's not, even if there's a hiccup for the next week, if it's implemented in the next couple of days, that should really help things out. So again, like CJ said, not financial advice, but I think we both believe in the long-term prospects of the game. And, we've both been looking at the market, but we don't have any liquidity to buy right now. So
yeah, I mean, all the horses that I've bought recently have been like 0.3 or lower, and it's just been because I've sold other horses to finance or sold other things, or I've gone in on a few horses with some friends. So, but yeah, if I see anything, I'll drop it and people can take a look. We picked up 3 horses recently. I mean, I'm happy to share them. So it's one here. This guy we got pretty cheap.
Tsunami, sorry we missed you leaving, but appreciate you joining, and I'll hit you up.
Yeah, I think he's he's in the Discord. We got this guy. And there was another one.
Well, yeah, while you're dropping those links, I did want to touch back on the market, because we've talked about this a little bit. And this is another thing that I talked about in my podcast with NFT Insight, ZED Insight. I think the legendary market right now is purely an element of the racing environment. The legendary market actually is not exponential because we're not getting any new Genesis horses into the environment. And if anything, we're having fewer people breeding on a month-to-month basis. So legendaries are fairly linear, if not, flat to declining, because and that should be supportable by kind of normal demand. You might see a little bit of noise there. The massive amount of babies, you are going to start to see exclusives and elites being bred in large quantities. we'll see how the market affects that. I mean, you've seen a few people in chat talking about not breeding this month. I have a few legendaries that I'm probably not going to breed, but that's more of an element of me trying to save my liquidity and not wanting to have to dump horses at the floor or have to wait for sales. So that's, I think about that a little bit differently than a lot of people do. But from a legendary market perspective, I think the biggest factor there is just getting stamina rolled out and having people try to find legendary racers. So I hope that kind of covers that. Let's see. Yeah, Zoo Andy, I think there are a lot of different ways you can go. I think males in general are relatively undervalued. I wouldn't necessarily say that specifically applies to Genesis. I'd say that applies more to bred horses. Because if you can find bred horses that you think have pretty decent base ability, then they're probably going to be 2 to 3 times cheaper or more than their filly counterparts, especially in some parts of the market. But again, not specific advice to go out and buy horses or anything like that. Just kind of what we're seeing. I mean, I think males are getting, affected much more kind of disproportionately than females are in this market. But as far as specific Z numbers or Genesis horses are always going to have their collectability value. But I don't think there's a specific recommendation there. It's just finding whatever, if you are looking for breeders, trying to find horses with high base ability. If you're looking for racers, then there are deals there too. Yeah, and there was a comment about ETH falling. I mean, it's been tough the last few days, right? This week and over the weekend. It's some people have called it a bear market. I think we need more than 3 or 4 days to call it a bear market, but it's definitely not straight up like it has been, or even kind of flat and bouncing between the levels that it has been. So it's just a different environment right now. Do we want to hit on this too much, CJ?
Yeah, I mean, I did say like we would kind of touch on it a little bit, just because we do feel obviously none of us can really know what's going on behind the scenes. Like, again, what you have right now is an innovative game in a space that is still relatively new. So that was always my argument before, when people complained a lot about how slow things were to be fixed, all the bugs, like all those things. And I do think it still applies. Like, they have hired more people, but it does take time to train people up, to get them on board with everything. At the same time, I do feel like some of the things that they're targeting and some of the ways that they go about fixing things, or their composition of their team, or how much they communicate with each other is not optimal. It does seem like there's a lot of broken lines of communication. There's a lot of it almost feels like there's a lack of passion towards the product itself, in my opinion. Like, I can't speak for anybody else, obviously. I just think that, you can see the trends based on the charts we showed at the beginning of the stream. Like, the racing is going down, the market is going down, and these things are going down more and more as time goes on. To me, there's just like, there were decisions made that could have avoided a lot of this. Like, they decided to implement fatigue and fire at the same time as having a huge GraphQL issue where their whole database was not updating properly. And racing wasn't working. So like, they implemented all these new things that, maybe they were really optimistic about, but they obviously aren't working the way that they intended, or maybe they are. And it's just, they had a different view than the users of their product did. But either way, it's not hard to look at that and see, oh, either we need to roll it back and just take stamina away for now because it's clearly really hurting the product, or we need to implement the fix a lot faster. So it does feel like there's a bit of like foot dragging or whatever you want to call it on making the fix. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what's been identified or what hasn't, but that's the general sense I get from the outside.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure. I think we're relatively in the same boat, CJ. I don't know if it's a complacency thing so much as just they still haven't caught up by how much this is exploded. We've got 100,000 users in Discord. We've got 110,000 horses. We've got all these things that they didn't expect to hit this year, and we're still 3 or 4 months out from the end of the year. So I think that's part of it, but I think we've both expressed frustration with fatigue and race generation, and how that's impacted the rest of the game, because racing is still kind of flat, not necessarily down. There was positive reaction to free races. The OpenSea volume is still there, the number of horses, but not necessarily the pricing. That's more where I get kind of the disconnect between how they see things and some of the underlying trends. But I think we both feel that as long as stamina is implemented soon, that all of that changes. Even if we're still in an environment where ETH goes down 40% in 2 weeks, because we had that happen back in May, and we had explosive growth in June and July. So part of that was breeding, part of that was interest in the game, some of the partnerships they announced. So it's just, realigning priorities to get the game working again, I think is important. And that has been a little slow, but we can't say necessarily why that's been. But every indication is that stamina rollout should happen, shortly. So they've communicated that a few times soon. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think just to kind of like to touch on that a little bit more, someone in the chat, I believe it was Zuandy, said that they have to know because of, this, that, and the other thing. Maybe at some level they know what's going on, and they see that, they have to be losing money. They have to be, because, they're not making as much money from racing, and they're definitely not making as much money from the market.
They're losing money.
Yeah, they're losing money. It's just that the message that they're still sending out is they're trying to spin it in a positive way, which either to me says that they don't know what's going on, or there's like a disconnect between the people who do know what's going on and what they're telling, their media people to say. So as far as like, the free races go, this was, again, in my opinion, just something that wasn't really like fully thought out, because like they knew that they had problems with bots. They knew that they needed to implement some way of dealing with that. But instead of trying to take away the incentive to bot, they actually added more incentive to bot. So like, free races getting botted into is just, it's so easy for them. Like I said earlier on stream, I haven't been able to get into a free race probably in about 2 weeks. And David can attest to this, but I spend a lot of time looking at the race screen. So, I mean, I don't know. I think that they have good intentions a lot of the time, but maybe they just don't fully think out the way that they're going about it. Or maybe they just have a different goal than we expect them to have. So that's also a possibility. They don't, just because we think that the game should be one way doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to make it so. Now that just kind of disconnect between what I would think is the large majority of their user base and their, vision for their project, I don't think is either like I don't think that is necessarily a good thing either. But anyway, I think that's I don't want to go on too long about that, because at the end of the day, I am definitely pro ZED. I think that what they have is a home run idea. I think what they've done is really amazing in the span of time that they've done it in. And I think that, it would not take a lot for them to tweak certain things and just make it just this amazing experience for everyone. There's always going to be hiccups. There's always going to be problems. There's always going to be lulls like this that any, beta game goes through. So I think the main issue is that like a lot of people have a lot of money invested in it. So it does feel a little bit more urgent at times. But I think at the end of the day, it's just hopefully they listen to the community. Hopefully, hopefully, yeah, they try to make it a fun experience and not a tedious one.
Yep.
But I think I gotta go.
Okay.
I've got a pretty bad headache, so.
Yeah. Appreciate you staying on then for a little while, and I'll clean up a couple of these last few questions and
trailing questions. Cool.
We'll see if we can find somebody to raid. I don't know if anybody's on, so we'll see. We'll have to check on that. But CJ,
right.
appreciate.
Just want to say thank you for everybody that came out. Always really appreciate and appreciate any support. And yeah, I'm happy to talk to anybody on Discord as always. But yeah, thanks, David, and we'll see you guys around.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, make sure if Sean is starting, we drop a raid on him because
popping on.
Sean's always a fun stream. A little bit of a different energy than ours, but
absolutely.
All right. Take care, guys.
Let me work through a couple more of these questions, guys, and then stick with me. And then if Sean is coming on, we'll definitely we'll definitely need to jump over there because again, he kind of amps it back up to end the evening for those of us who are later in the evening and gets people going for the Aussies that are watching us right now. So Connor Reich, you asked about legendaries. Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit here and there. I think the easiest way they could change that is to increase the Genesis factor from 180% to like 300%, and that would get you like $100 between the Genesis and legendary fee. I think the other piece of this would be, as more horses are bred and as breeding continues, you're going to start to see some of the Zabo and the Finny legendary or Genesis fees come off the floor like you've seen Nakamoto's. So there are Nakamoto legendaries that get studs. But right now with the rates the way they are with Zabos and Finnies, a lot of them being at the floor, it is tougher for legendaries to get a stud. Unless you have a good color, a desirable color, or some people breed with better racers or have specific horses that they're looking at, and those will get filled. Mandalorian, CJ and I have both sold good racers. I probably sold my best racer to raise liquidity to buy a Z2. So it's tough. It really is tough. I'm not as big a racer, but if you've got kind of goals, then definitely weigh those goals or how you want to shift your horse portfolio, if you will. Again, not financial advice, but it's sometimes worth that heartache of getting rid of a good horse. Let's see. Yeah, Zoo Andy, I think we've talked about this a little bit, but yeah, I mean, the communication, we've always, I think a lot of us have complained about the communication. I think at times the communication has been good enough. Recently, definitely wish there'd been more communication about stamina and how that's coming along. Dragnet, definitely feel free to reach out to CJ or me on Discord, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Let's see. Adrian, this is controversial. I know there's been some chat going on about this. It's a little bit of a controversial topic. There are people who advertise botting services who usually pretty quickly get banned from the general, but they've said that they've looked into botting and they don't think it's an issue. But obviously, if they're taking steps to try to reduce botting, they have a concern. So I think there is, and I know Gags has mentioned free races. I mean, the fact that it's basically impossible to get into a free race, even if there are 3 or 4 available at a time, I think speaks to the fact that there are bots. So don't have absolute confirmation of that, but I think they exist. So bear with me as I'm working through these. I think I'm getting caught up. Yeah, get me quickly. I mean, there are definitely people who have been able to get into free races at least a couple a day, and so it's happening. But it's just, you've got to be on it. You've got to know when the race is starting. I think somebody mentioned watching the next running tab to see when one was finishing or rolling off. That is one way to do it. That's how I used to do it in April or May. Although I've probably only run about 20 free races total since I started with ZED. So I'm not the best person to talk to free races about. But the one thing there is that the horse that you asked about earlier, or the question you had about this one, I guess, feel free to jump into our Discord and we'll take a look when we get a chance. And Gags, yeah, I mean, I think this is stamina is one, the top need needs to be done today. We actually talked to Golden Glow a little bit. If you guys want to check out ZED News Network, we talked to them about this a little bit. That race generation piece, I don't know if this made it into the actual podcast or if it was more of kind of an after credits thing, but some elements of the race generation might be built into kind of the root of their system. And so it might actually be kind of difficult to change that race algorithm, more difficult than we give them credit for. But I think it's necessary at some point. I definitely agree that Z4 and Z5 or Z4 and Z5, class 4 and class 5 generation needs to be beefed up. So, and no, Zoo Andy, I mean, I appreciate your disclaimer here. I think we're actually, I don't want to say we complain, but we like to call attention to things that we think need to be improved. Again, we're both invested in this game. We love it, and we just want to see it improved for everybody. So always love to talk about some of the more controversial topics that others might not touch on. So but guys, I think with that, I don't see Sean on yet. So, and I don't see really any of the other kind of main streamers on. Hey, Colada, thanks for joining. I think you're catching us at the very end. Really appreciate everybody that stuck with us today, and we're right at 2 hours, so that's about what we like to target. Hope you guys found it interesting. Now, Zoo, I'm not exhausted. I'm just I'm kind of medium to low energy compared to CJ and some of the other guys. I could do this all night. But yeah, really appreciate you jumping on. Hop into our Discord if you haven't already. We'll get the YouTube content loaded. Our breeding stream is out there. You'll see this stream loaded, and we'll get kind of all the streams in between up and out there. You'll likely see us over the next couple of weeks do a few more racing pop-up streams. If you watched us early on, we did those. Rather than having some of the preset content like we had today, we focus solely on questions about specific horses like we did a few times here. I know we didn't hit on all those horses today, so appreciate you guys asking those questions, and sorry we didn't get to every horse today. But yeah, hop in the Discord, check out the YouTube videos for the old VODs, the existing VODs, and then keep an eye on Twitter for our additional content, and then also, as we call it a couple of times, really appreciate the ZED Insight, NFT Insight interview. Go check out our interviews there, and all of his other content is fantastic as well. But appreciate everything tonight. You guys have a good night or a good day, depending on where we're catching you, and we'll probably talk to you this weekend. But if not, we'll see you next week for another scheduled stream. So thanks, guys.